What is the role of science, diplomacy, knowledge in today's world?
I would say that science and technology are not only tools, but they became now infrastructure of geopolitics.
This word, science diplomacy, for me and the listeners, can you explain what does this actually mean and what it entails?
Yeah, we could say that science diplomacy, some other times we talk about knowledge diplomacy or science and technology diplomacy, but we could say that this is the umbrella term for the use of science and technology to build better international cooperation. Another third dimension that is becoming more and more relevant given the current challenges we have ahead is how we position scientific knowledge, scientific evidence into foreign policy, how we inform international negotiations with science.
Through the lens of science diplomacy, like what you've just described, can you tell us how knowledge and science are or have been or will shape this changing world order sort of a thing?
I would say, Osama, that a big part of what is happening is about competition, but also cooperation around capabilities. Who owns the talent?
You've used the word planetary diplomacy. How is it relevant to Pakistan and what does it mean? What does it entail?
Planetary diplomacy is about how we use science diplomacy, how we leverage science diplomacy to tackle these planetary risks. Pakistan has also something more to offer to the world. It's the place where it's already putting this science diplomacy into practice and others can learn from Pakistan.
What is your assessment? Where are we heading in terms of this AI race from a geopolitical perspective?
I like to think that the efforts we are doing, or many are doing, and particularly international organizations like UNESCO and so on are doing in terms of create a series of standards and governance for AI are not useless.
Right.
I think it's important that we set at this the basis of what is right or is not right to use and what use we do with these technologies or we give to these technologies, because technology or scientific knowledge is not good or bad by itself, but the use and the applications we might do with them. AI can be used to screen the behavior of people. It could be used to control people in a way we might not like. And obviously this can cross the line of human rights in some places.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the WTI Talks. In this episode, we're going to talk about something new and learn about something new. Words like science diplomacy, planetary diplomacy, the role of knowledge in the diplomacy and the world where we live in right now, and the whole geopolitical dimension of it. And to discuss this, we have with us Professor Alexis Roig. Thank you so much for being with us today. He is the CEO of Sci-Tech Diplo Hub, and he's also a researcher at the United Nations University. And he has been and still is a professor at several international universities. Along with this, he has also been an advisor to European Commission and several national governments for science and technology, diplomacy and strategy. Thank you once again, Professor, for being with us today. Now to start off, I know you've been traveling from Davos and you've engaged there in different sessions and in Pakistan as well. To just start off simply, I would like to ask, what is the role of science, diplomacy, knowledge in today's world, and how does this work together, like all of these things?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Osama, for the invitation and hosting me today. I would say that if you see what is really shaping the world today, is no longer just about trade routes, not just about armies. We are seeing that scientific knowledge, technological knowledge, or applications are also part of how we shape international relations. And we saw this with climate, with the disruption of AI. We saw this with pandemics. We see this with drafts and other global crises. So we see these kind of systemic shocks that are earth-wide. They are affecting the entire human architecture. And that's why we need scientific and technological knowledge in order to tackle many of these challenges. And that's why we see more and more governments working in science and technology diplomacy, as it's necessary for the way we understand and we govern our institutions and our country. So I would say that science and technology are not only tools, but they became now infrastructure of geopolitics.
Okay, and this is very interesting because to your point, when we discuss climate, the solution to this would not be military or even economic. It would come from science. So that is why this has become more important.
Definitely, we're not saying that science is a magical thing that reframes completely international relations, and the powers based on hard power, military pressures or capacities, as well as trade, are not relevant at all. It's just that we have another instrument, another infrastructure that is becoming more and more relevant, and it is interconnected with all these other dimensions we were mentioning.
Okay, before moving on to the next question, another one. So before at Renaissance, or when science started to dawn during the European ages and everything, so do you think at that point it was still there, or was it less? Like the role of it, science and knowledge was less, or it was still there, and now we are building upon that?
I think it was still there. I mean, now we talk about science diplomacy, and it sounds like a brand new thing or like a trendy concept. But science diplomacy, it's been there a long time. I mean, international routes of what we understood as mainly trade between the East and the West, the West and the East, the Silk Road, and so on. It was mainly based about exchanges of knowledge, new techniques, new materials. And we've seen this obviously in times of the Renaissance and new discoveries in science. And I think that science diplomacy has always been there. It's been a tool of competition and cooperation, scientific knowledge. But now what we have been building in the last decades is a system, a framework, trying to understand science diplomacy also as a tool for international cooperation. And I think there is where we have moved forward and where we have an advantage, an added value currently.
Okay, and this word, science diplomacy, I know you've been one of the people to shape this idea and promote it as well. And for me and the listeners, can you explain what does this actually mean and what it entails?
Yeah, we could say that science diplomacy, some other times we talk about knowledge diplomacy or science and technology diplomacy. But we could say that this is the umbrella term for the use of science and technology to build better international cooperation.
Right.
But this can take different forms. We usually talk about different dimensions of science diplomacy. Obviously, one could be how scientific cooperation shapes international relations, meaning science oftentimes is considered neutral, universal, in the sense that the scientific method and scientific knowledge, evidence, is not necessarily embedded into one national context or one religion or one language. So it's universal. So this international cooperation that scientists do every day can facilitate international cooperation between countries, particularly when maybe the relations are at stall. But also another dimension is how diplomatic efforts, diplomatic channels are used or mobilized to do more and better scientific exchanges. So countries signing agreements to facilitate mobility of researchers or finance joint research projects. And obviously another third dimension that is becoming more and more relevant given the current challenges we have ahead is how we position scientific knowledge, scientific evidence into foreign policy, how we inform international negotiations with science. And obviously topics like climate, as we were saying, are a good example of this. If we talk about, for example, if we decide the threshold of 1.5 degrees is a threshold we should not surpass, these are not figures that just a few politicians or diplomats came up with. It's based in science. So this kind of informing international negotiations or international accords in scientific knowledge is also part of what we understand of science diplomacy. And I would say that nowadays science diplomacy naturally incorporates also technology.
Right.
So when we talk about AI governance, biotechnology, neurotech, all these kind of things that need a global governance, this is also part of what science diplomacy manages and works on.
Okay, and you discussed foreign policy, and it takes us to the next question or aspect of this discussion, which is about we hear a lot about the term changing world order, and when we hear this term, mostly, of course, what comes to mind is military power or economic power, right? Through the lens of science diplomacy, like what you've just described, can you tell us how knowledge and science are or have been or will shape this changing world order sort of a thing?
Yeah, I would say, Osama, that a big part of what is happening is about competition, but also cooperation around capabilities. Who owns the talent? Who owns the universities? Who owns the research capacities? And plenty of discussion is going around this kind of topics. Who can turn knowledge into actual, actionable solutions for society? And then you see politicians talking big words that doesn't look like what we are saying here. But when you try to move it down to the specifics, to zoom in, you see that at the end we're talking about this, about knowledge and how we apply it. So we're talking about technical standards or AI standards or the ethic use of new technologies, data capabilities, the capacity of having health surveillance systems to avoid pandemics, how we manage or we measure climate risks. All these kind of things are scientific and technological by nature. Yes. And those are some of the greatest challenges we have, and some of the greatest challenges that governments are trying to tackle or anticipate or manage. So that's why this sound technical knowledge could be a tool for shaping markets, shaping international relations, shaping trust for society, which is something that we need more and more. So at places like Davos or other global fora, you see this in the discussions. It's part of the conversation. But in countries like Pakistan, I would say that you see this concrete reality happening already. You have the challenges of the impact of climate or health issues already happening. So it's not just about words, but those that are being more impacted, trying to be part of the solution.
So, countries would have to work on the science diplomacy as well to, get ahead in the changing world order or the emerging world order, as fashionable as the term has become. Next question is about Pakistan, or about an international issue relevant to Pakistan. It's about climate resilience, and you've spoken about it here at ThinkFest as well and otherwise, and you've used the word planetary diplomacy. Now, this is another new term. How is it relevant to Pakistan, and what does it mean? What does it entail?
Sure, this is totally connected with what we were saying. We see that planetary diplomacy becomes obvious when you see our environment, our context, what are we facing. Many of the biggest risks and challenges we have ahead are not national, not even regional. They are global by definition. And here we talk about biodiversity loss, climate risks, we talk about pandemics, obviously, and the consequences of how we manage or we don't manage AI governance or energy transition, among many others. So those large-scale, planetary-scale challenges should be managed from this planetary perspective, and it's when science diplomacy comes into action. Planetary diplomacy is about how we use science diplomacy, how we leverage science diplomacy to tackle these planetary risks. And here we need the knowledge, science, technology, and we need this international cooperation, as we were saying, because there are no borders for those challenges. And this is why we need countries like Pakistan that we could say they already live in the future, in the sense that many countries talk about how many of these potential challenges in climate or planetary wide ones might affect them. Pakistan is already managing and tackling with many of them. Pakistan has mega cities because it hosts big urban populations. It has gone through floods, through heat waves, and also food crisis, global health challenges. And so Pakistan is already a test bed for many of these challenges. The thing is how we make also Pakistan the proof, the lab, the place where knowledge is already put into place. So Pakistan has also something more to offer to the world. It's the place where it's already putting this science diplomacy into practice, and others can learn from Pakistan.
Okay, and so this means the next thing that I should ask from you is that then what should Pakistan or a country should do in terms of politics, in terms of all the other fields you've described, in order to build capacity at the national level, right? In science diplomacy, in planetary diplomacy, and all the related things. What steps should we or should a country take?
Sure, that's a challenging question. I don't think that there is a one solution that fits all. I mean, you really need to adapt any strategy or project or approach into the idiosyncrasy and the characteristics of a country. But I would say that there are mainly three things to take into account. First of all, institutions. You need to make sure that there is inside governments, either national or regional or subnational, you need to have the capacity to connect scientific knowledge and public policy. You need this science policy interface, science policy nexus. Institutions need to be ready to incorporate scientific knowledge into the work they do, which is not happening oftentimes in Pakistan and in many other countries all around the world. Secondly, I would say people, talent. You need to train people to be able to speak both languages, the language of science and scientific knowledge and the language of policy making, trying to translate one thing into another, trying to help them to become science diplomats. And I think that this is an essential part, building capacities for people from different backgrounds. Here, when we say science, we're not talking about natural sciences. We also talk about social sciences, the humanities. But people that is capable to bring evidence, evidence-based facts, ideas into how we formulate policy. So policy is not just something that is decided by political priorities or by political ideologies or ideas, but also scientific facts. And finally, strategy. No country can do this alone. And a strategy on science diplomacy should last longer than a term or a government. It should be bigger than a single country. So we need to build these strategies and the international alliances to make these kind of projects happen. But so I think I would say these are the three main elements. And then it requires this long shot, long-term view to make it happen.
Right. A thing that I've noticed is that all of this focuses more or requires more cooperation and collaboration than competition. But the world seems to be, as IMF said, use the word fragmentation a lot, even in economic terms. So do you think like this is doing a disservice to these fields, or it's still a growing one, or it's in its infancy? Or is it like a proper challenge like this?
I mean, I would say that the current fragmentation is definitely not helping into different nations and different regions or blocks coming together to face those challenges. That's a fact. And sometimes we feel like we're going backwards in terms of what we managed to build in terms of international cooperation or a multilateral system and so on. This is there, and we have to. We should not try to approach science diplomacy as something that is idealized and it's just like easy and we're just moving forward. Sometimes we do 2 steps ahead and 1 step backwards. I would say that many of the science diplomacy cooperation that is lasting despite of the challenges is because, as we were saying earlier, the problems we try to solve are shared with others. So we might not agree on some specific trade issue or political perspective or either more serious issues with a neighbor or another country. But there are some challenges that we like the others or not, we need to solve because, I mean, your health issue is affecting my health issue, your biodiversity laws is affecting my country as well, because all these challenges are not about borders. I mean, nature flows. So this is a good reason. This is a good excuse, if you allow me the word, to cooperate through science. So I would say challenges are there in terms of fragmentation and creation of blocks and potentially less cooperation in trade and other issues. But there is a space, there's an opportunity with science and technology.
I mean, that is why we hear the term minilateralism a lot, because it's exactly what you said, actually. Okay.
Soft law.
Yes.
Minilateralism.
Countries cooperating on certain issues and then maybe not agreeing on everything else. Moving towards the individual now, right? Before I ask you like what we need to study or do, but in terms of careers, I really want to touch this upon because in Pakistan, it so happens that there are only a few fields that students, youngsters would want to go. And it's a dilemma. It's not a good thing, I think. But things like these, do you think like it offers a good career path first? And then if yes, then what are some of the positions or organizations or pathways we're looking at for youngsters?
That's a really good one. I would say that science diplomats are not necessarily always labeled as science diplomats. What do I mean here is that you might be a science diplomat, but maybe your job title doesn't say so. A science diplomat at the end of the day is a knowledge broker, is a bridge builder, is someone that is capable to translate, as we were saying earlier, scientific knowledge into policy and the other way around. And you find these kind of profiles obviously in ministries of foreign affairs, ministries of health, ministries of climate, but you also see them at international organizations, of course. You see them at NGOs, in the private sector, at consulting firms. I mean, these kind of roles are because, you know, like science diplomacy sometimes might, or being a science diplomat might sound like a fancy concept.
Yes.
And it sounds like exclusive or a very niche field, but it's super transversal, and more institutions from all sorts need these kind of profiles. So I would say that is about connecting evidence with decision, and we should understand that this is not a job or a job title, is a function. So being a science diplomat is a function. You bring this value, this knowledge into your organization, your institution, and you know this way of operating in between systems, if you want. COVID pandemic was a clear example. Right. I recall being part of some advisory boards during the first month of the crisis, and you know, like most countries put together some groups of experts that they were scientists that were advising government, and there was a lot of frustration because science usually operates in uncertainty. You know, that's what we know now. Maybe what we will know next month is different. It's going to be, we will know more, or we will know that what we thought it was right, it is not right anymore. While at the same time, the process of policy making, policy diplomacy, it needs certainty. You need to make a decision right now, right here. And making sure that scientists know how to properly advise policymakers to make things happen, and that also policymakers are aware of the processes and timings of science so they don't misuse it or discard scientific recommendations, is really necessary. That's just an example because we all went through the COVID pandemic, but this can be applied in many other challenges or situations in governance or even in the private sector. So that's why I think that the people capable of operating between knowledge, power, and society will have plenty of professional opportunities now and in the near future.
Right. And for someone like for me or anyone listening to this podcast, if they want to start their field, their career in this, what are the first steps? What should we read? What should we look at? What should we follow? How will you guide?
The good thing here is that I would say you don't need, or we don't need in general, one single sort of profile. Since as we are talking about, people with different backgrounds, different areas of knowledge are good fits for science diplomacy. You bring your own knowledge from your main background, whether it's international relations, economics, other policy-related one, or natural sciences. I would say that it's very important to have the skills, as we were saying, to translate complex ideas into simple documents, simple actionable things. That might sound like easy. It is not when we talk about topics like health, climate, and so on. It's not something that ChatGPT or your AI is going to do properly without knowing enough about the context. Because here, when we talk context, we talk policy. So that means understanding the governance structure of a given country, nation, region, but also cultural awareness and these kind of nuances that you need to be aware of. And very related with this, it's not just about writing, summarizing, or simplifying ideas. It's also about having a view of systems thinking. All these problems we were saying are all interconnected. It's not climate alone in a silo, not connected to human health or animal health or biodiversity or economy or how we lift people from poverty. All this is interconnected. So many times we misuse, I would say, many resources in terms of investment from development banks, governments, and so on, in trying to solve many of these challenges in a silo way. Also, mainly because we arrive late, we just like try to mitigate the consequences and not anticipate. So this system thinking, I think it's a key skill for
systems thinking.
Anyone preparing to become a science diplomat or working in planetary diplomacy. And they, I would say, pick a domain. Obviously, it's not a winning option to try to be an expert on everything. So obviously this system thinking or capacity of translating complex ideas into easier and more actual ones is transversal, but then we need people that either knows more about water scarcity and resilience, or how to manage humanitarian risk after climate shocks and so on. So picking a topic and exchanging with others, there is plenty of. That's a good thing about technologies nowadays. There's plenty of information out there, trainings, videos, podcasts that you can follow, even free trainings. There is plenty of communities, fora, and events about many of these topics where you can get familiar with, and obviously networking, because many of the things we're talking about, they might sound very technical, but I mean, we have the science or tech, but then we have the diplomacy part. This is also about people, having the right connections and connecting with the people, making sure that you know who you can bring value to. It's not about who's gonna find a job for me, but it's who I can help. So this is essential, and you can learn plenty of things from others that are already in the field.
Very well said. Before moving on to the last question, one thing I really want to ask, there is a lot of hue and cry about AI, ethics, future of AI, geopolitics. We have two sort of, if not blocks, then points of view. Like China has lots of access to data and it's feeding their algorithms. US and Europe, on the other hand, GDPR and concerns about privacy. Like, what is your assessment? Like, where are we heading in terms of this AI race from a geopolitical perspective? What do you see in the future, near future?
Well, it's risky to try to predict a field that is evolving so fast. I like to think that the efforts we are doing, or many are doing, and particularly international organizations like UNESCO and so on are doing in terms of create a series of standards and governance for AI are not useless. Right. I think it's important that we set at least the basis of what is right or is not right to use, and what use we do with these technologies, or we give to these technologies, because like technology or scientific knowledge is not good or bad by itself, but the use and the applications we might do with them might be. So obviously AI can be used to screen the behavior of people. It could be used to control people in a way we might not like, and obviously this can cross the line of human rights in some places. But at the same time, we know that feeding more information and giving access to more data to some of these algorithms might help us produce new tools that might be useful to the market. So there is this balance. Right. Obviously, the US has been a champion in AI in the last years, and there's huge investment and big companies both into the development of large language models, but also into the chips and hardware that we need, or that data centers we need to use this AI. China is advancing really fast, but as you were saying, the constraints or the legal framework in the US, China, and particularly the EU, which is very reluctant about how tech companies or AI systems might use private data of citizens. Those are completely different approaches. But then we see how Europe, that like to perceive itself, and I think it's been like this for years, as a champion in putting together the legislation and the rules to keep things more ethical. Yes. But this has consequences also on how fast your market develops. Yeah. That's a fact. And even when the EU launched last year, or announced last year, or approved last year, their AI Act that was meant to try to see what kind of uses are really a no-no, or what kind of uses might be really more controlled. Now they just postponed the application of a big part of this AI Act to 2027, when it was supposed to start this year. And this is also because, on the one side, the challenges for many companies to apply all the regulation, but also because we start seeing that, well, I mean, we want to comply with all these, but then we're less competitive than our friends on the other side of the world. So I would like to see at some point that we come to an agreement into really what are the red lines in the use of globally. Otherwise, we will be building different societies, different blocks that really evolve. And this happens in other topics that might sound like more specific or very scientific, but this also happen in gene edition and biotechnology. I mean, we either put a global regulation, or like we're gonna have people, countries with some disease, and some others that have managed to erase those diseases because they use technology that is not allowed in other places. So these things might sound like sci-fi,
movie,
but
yes.
Those are nowadays conversation in many international organizations and governments. So that's why we need people ready to work on science diplomacy and planetary diplomacy.
Right. Final question. This was your first visit to Pakistan?
Yeah.
So, give me a proper and very straightforward assessment of where do we stand in terms of all of these things you've just spoken about: science diplomacy and planetary diplomacy, and you spoke at the Foreign Service Academy, you've interacted with students, youngsters, a message to not only the civil servants or government, people going to serve in the government, but otherwise to everyone who wants to serve the nation in terms of climate resiliency, in terms of AI diplomacy or science diplomacy, please.
I would say that Pakistan has hard challenges, but at the same time, it also has really important assets. You have a huge young population, passionate young population willing to learn new things and to do things. Pakistan has a strong scientific community that's really relevant.
Okay.
And connecting with your point on climate and these global issues, it has a direct experience on the risks and consequences of these challenges. So it's not theory, it's not sci-fi, it's not, well, in the future this is going to happen. No, this is happening here and now. So Pakistan, it's not that it needs to adapt to the future, it's that in many areas it can help define how others need to adapt to the future. So others might only be thinking that, oh, this could happen. You can show them this already happened here, this is how we are managing, so we can share our contribution to the world is how we are already managing these things, that this is going to be happening to all of you in the near future. That's the point. Pakistan has a clear advantage to lead, obviously, in the region, in South Asia, Central Asia, in the Muslim world, but also internationally, because the nature of what we are discussing it's totally global. So I think this is one of the strengths of Pakistan, and I really hope to see more and more science and planetary diplomacy coming from.
Well, let's hope that as well. So thank you so much once again, Professor, for being with us today, and I hope that we would continue this series of speaking with you whenever you visit Pakistan.
Sure.
And even otherwise. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Thank you.